Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today. So let's talk about AEW. How can you not talk about AEW, especially with the stories that are going on over the last few days? I mean, yesterday was one of the biggest news days I can think of. You know, covering, I don't even know if what I say I do is covering pro wrestling, but being a pro wrestling fan, put it that way, being a pro wrestling fan, yesterday was one of the just wildest news days ever. It just felt like every single second there was another story, and the majority of them had to do with AEW. And the big one, of course, after CM Punk, the rumors and reports of him negotiating an in-ring return with AEW being the most likely destination for the WWE Champion. How could you even top that? Well, you top that by the news that it's been confirmed reportedly that Daniel Bryan has signed with All Elite Wrestling. Now, this was an exclusive story first reported by Bodyslam.net. Since it has been reported, Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter has also backed up this report. Other outlets aren't as quick to confirm it, but a lot of people within the industry, the likes of Sean Ross Sapp, Fightful, have added some credibility to this report, specifically Cassidy Haynes of Bodyslam.net, who was first to break this story, stating that Cassidy does have significant sources and ties within AEW. So this story does have quite a lot of weight to it. So the speculation here is that Daniel Bryan has indeed signed a contract with AEW. Now, to add a bit of context to this, Daniel Bryan's last match within WWE took place on the April 30th edition of Friday Night SmackDown on Fox. He lost that Universal Championship match to Roman Reigns in a match that was billed as Championship versus Career. Now, subsequently, it was then reported that Daniel Bryan's WWE contract had expired on May 4th of 2021. Now, there were some rumors regarding Daniel Bryan that broke earlier this week. We actually did the story yesterday prior to Fyter Fest, prior to the story breaking last night about Bryan signing a deal with AEW. There had been lots of speculation as to what the future holds for the former WrestleMania main eventer. It was reported earlier this week via PW Insider that there were no merchandise plans or action figure plans in place for Daniel Bryan within WWE for the remainder of the year, and this led many to believe that Daniel Bryan was not going to be returning to WWE. There was a feeling within WWE amongst senior officials and executives that Daniel Bryan would be heading to AEW, although that couldn't be confirmed at the time. Bear in mind, this is a huge contrast to previously when Bryan's contract first expired with WWE. There was a feeling that Daniel Bryan would be back. He was just taking some time off. Vince McMahon himself reportedly was calming everyone down, saying, don't worry, Daniel Bryan's going to be coming back. In reality, he's now signed with AEW. Now, in an update, as I mentioned, this was reported by Bodyslam.net. Cassidy Haynes broke this story. There's been a lot of speculation about Daniel Bryan's future, but in an update as to the future of Daniel Bryan, Bryan Danielson, as he was known as in Ring of Honor and as he'll be known as in AEW going forward, a source, according to Cassidy Haynes and Bodyslam.net, has spoken to Cassidy and spoken that Daniel Bryan is reportedly, quote, locked in and has 100% already signed a contract with AEW. So they are going on the record stating that there isn't any discussion of he's close to signing, he's in negotiations, blah, blah, blah. The report is Daniel Bryan has already signed his AEW contract. He is 100% locked in. In addition, there has been a report in this report, there's been extra details as to what really led to the deal coming together, what Daniel Bryan asked for when he was negotiating with AEW, how this contract came together, what his demands were or requests were. Now, in addition, the report states that Daniel Bryan, was wanting to work less dates for comparable money to what he was getting in WWE. He also wanted the ability to work in Japan. Of course, AEW does have a working relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Last night's edition of AEW Fyter Fest was main evented via an IWGP United States Championship match in which the title changed hands, so there is a working relationship there. In addition to that, several AEW wrestlers have a specific clause in their contract, names such as Chris Jericho, Jon Moxley, even all of the executives such as Kenny Omega, Cody Rhodes, etc. I think Miro has it in his contract as well. They all have clauses in their contract stating that if they're able to get a date with New Japan, they can work those dates as long as it doesn't conflict with AEW. That is what Daniel Bryan wanted as well, even when he was negotiating with WWE. Of course, WWE couldn't offer him that, but AEW could. Daniel Bryan also was reportedly wanted to have creative input on his character, which of course AEW was willing to give. Now, some people would say, whoa, Hulk Hogan creative control. No, it's not like that at all. Several talents within AEW have a creative input on their character. Even names such as Darby Allin have significant creative input on their character. Of course, the senior names, Kenny Omega, Cody Rhodes, Chris Jericho, Sting, the list goes on and on. They all have creative input on their character. It's a very collaborative effort within AEW in comparison to within WWE, where it's a very corporate structure. You have your writers, you have your officials, you kind of have to do what you're told. Now, that isn't the only thing when it comes to Daniel Bryan and AEW. In a further report by Cassidy Haynes from Bodyslam.net, we also have some details as to when to expect Daniel Bryan to show up in AEW. Of course, as I mentioned, he's already signed his AEW contract, and we already have some tentative plans for when Daniel Bryan is going to be making his AEW debut in terms of storylines, dates, etc. Now, Bodyslam.net are reporting that Danielson, as I mentioned, was wanting to work less dates for comparable money, the ability to work in Japan, and wanted to have a creative input on his character, all of which he did receive in this contract. They were also told that there were tentative plans creatively for Bryan Danielson's AEW debut. Now, at the time of recording and at the time of which this report was posted yesterday, which was 8:45 p.m. Wednesday, July 21st, 2021, the plan as of right now, or at least then, the plan was to have Bryan Danielson make his AEW debut on the September 22nd AEW Dynamite, which of course is when AEW heads to Arthur Ashe Stadium in New York City for that Grand Slam edition of Dynamite. It's AEW's first stadium show. It's nearly sold out. It's expected to sell out in New York City. It's a massive event, a real sign of intent, statement of intent, and a real success story for AEW. That is reportedly the tentative plan as of right now for when AEW wants to have Bryan Danielson make his AEW debut. Now, the plan was to hold off debuting Danielson until all of AEW's plans for All Out were officially wrapped up. Of course, we're on the road to All Out on September 5th, and every single thing we're seeing on television right now is heading to All Out and is planned for All Out. So AEW, considering that Bryan has just signed his contract with AEW, the plan was, let's get everything wrapped up for All Out, and we can have Danielson make this big debut on probably what is going to be their biggest show of the year, certainly their biggest Dynamite of the year, probably the biggest Dynamite in their history since the debut episode on September 22nd at Arthur Ashe Stadium in New York City, their first stadium show. But with the news of CM Punk's potential AEW debut leaking yesterday, of course, Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful was first to report that CM Punk is in negotiations to make an in-ring return. Now, AEW wasn't confirmed as the destination, but it was considered to be the most likely destination. In fact, WWE officials, in a similar vein to them expecting Daniel Bryan to sign with AEW, they also expect CM Punk to sign with AEW as well. Because of that news story yesterday, this may have caused plans to change for when AEW rather wants Daniel Bryan to make his debut, or Bryan Danielson, I guess we should now be calling him, his debut. So we can tentatively, as of right now, expect to see Bryan Danielson make his AEW debut when the company makes their huge debut in New York City on September 22nd in that stadium show at Arthur Ashe Stadium. It's a massive event, and with Bryan Danielson showing up, it's just got even bigger. Those two names, Bryan Danielson, CM Punk signing with AEW. Look, I mentioned this yesterday, and I mentioned it on social media, and I know it's not the same, and I know people roll their eyes and go, oh, blah, blah, blah. Bryan Danielson and CM Punk, to me, it's like when Hogan and Savage signed with WCW in the mid-90s. Now, again, it's not the same. Hogan and Savage were far bigger stars than Danielson and CM Punk are now, but it is a game changer. It is absolutely a game changer. And I've seen people, look, and I mentioned this on social media last night as well. I know for whatever reason, some people don't like AEW. The content isn't for them. The psychology isn't for them. And there are things to pick apart in AEW. It's far from a perfect product. I, myself, enjoy the product immensely, and I think it's very good. I think the shows they've done since they've gone back on the road have been just spectacular. They've been absolutely fantastic, but there are issues still within the product. There are always going to be issues within the product, and that is something that AEW is obviously looking to improve. And for that reason, people aren't fans of the product. Some people aren't fans, and that's up to them. That's their decision. I'm not one of those people that's like, you have to like one, you have to like the other. If you don't like AEW, that's fine. And I know they're really quick to write off these Bryan Danielson and CM Punk stories, and they're saying that, oh, it's not a game changer. What's a game changer? Blah, blah, blah. But in reality, Dynamite last week, Fyter Fest Night 1, it did over 1 million viewers. It was the #1 show on cable. Now, in reality, is Daniel Bryan and CM Punk, are they really going to move the needle? Well, even if they did by, say, 200,000 viewers, and I don't know if they will, but even let's say they do move the needle by 200,000 viewers, if AEW Dynamite is getting 1.2 million viewers per week after only 2 years of being on the air, they're only 200,000 viewers away from Monday Night Raw at their lowest rating a couple of weeks ago. Monday Night Raw, they did 1.4 million viewers. Now, people are going to go, well, it's a holiday, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, that gap is shrinking. That gap is shrinking because the viewership for Raw is going down. People can say, well, it was up to 1.9 million viewers this week and blah, blah, blah. Yes. Yes, it was. But again, Dynamite, it's on an upward trajectory and Raw is on a downward trajectory. And whilst maybe CM Punk and Daniel Bryan might not be enough to bridge that gap, they're certainly enough to get it closer. And with some of the names that debuted as well last night, and you look at that roster right now that AEW has, it's beyond stacked. I mean, it's beyond stacked. And CM Punk returning to the ring would arguably be the biggest story of the year. But Daniel Bryan also, you know, people are saying, oh, he jumped. No, wait, no, his contract expired. And let's face it, we spoke about this before when we did the WWE News videos on the channel when it comes to Daniel Bryan. Daniel Bryan's always been really open with what he wants. Really open with what he wants. He said, look, I don't know how much longer I'm going to do this. I want to be with my family more. I also want the opportunity to work with other promotions. I would ideally want to stay with WWE, but I realize that might not be possible. It might not be possible to get everything in together. And I think Bryan realizes now, wait a minute, if I'm doing Dynamite, I have to travel once a week, maybe twice a week, occasionally, but we're talking once a week. Maybe not even that, because some weeks I'll get some time off. I can wrestle in Japan if I want to. I can do whatever I want to. I can have creative input, I can make good money, and I can finish out my career doing stuff I'm really proud of. What's that for him to do in WWE? He just main evented WrestleMania this year. Realistically, there's not a lot left for him to do and achieve. So these people are going, it's shocking, it's surprising. The only reason it's shocking is because his ties are so deep within WWE. But when you know and you think about Bryan Danielson, the performer, the guy that was on the independent scene for so long and everything he has achieved, this guy does have, I don't want to say morals, because I think that throws unnecessary shade at WWE, but he's an artist. You know, it's about the artwork and it's about the art form, and he wants things he wants to do, when either it's Japan or spend time with his family. To me, it's not the most surprising thing. I think the most surprising thing about it was that we were getting these reports from WWE going, don't worry, he's going to re-sign with us, he'll come back. Now, you have to acknowledge that there is an alternative. And WWE this year, they're letting a lot of people slip through their fingers. For a company that loves to rely on older talent and part-timers and legends coming back in, they're letting an awful lot of them slip through their fingers. And it's a fascinating period. I mean, the pro wrestling news over the course of the last few days has been wild. I mean, absolutely wild. Daniel Bryan signing with AEW, CM Punk possibly returning to the ring in AEW, Jay White showing up in Impact Wrestling, where Kenny Omega's the world champion and Jay White's part of New Japan, John Cena returning to WWE to face Roman Reigns at SummerSlam in a stadium show. It's madness. Absolute madness, and it's very exciting, and it's awesome. As a pro wrestling fan, it's awesome. We are so fortunate right now. Now, let's talk about Fyter Fest last night, because this was Fyter Fest on TNT for AEW, and it was, again, I don't think it was as good as last week, but man, it was a good show. I mean, it really was a good show. As I mentioned, the pacing of these shows are fantastic. So we have some things already announced for next week's show, one of which is Chris Jericho versus Nick, I'm not going to swear, but Nick Gage. Yes, Nick Gage made a surprise appearance on AEW Fyter Fest Night 2, setting up a no-rules match between he and Chris Jericho at next week's Fight for the Fallen event. This is part 2 of the 5 Labors of Jericho. If Nick Gage, Ultraviolence Deathmatch Nick Gage is only part 2 of the 5 Labors of Jericho, what is next? I mean, what is next? Now, Jericho defeated Shawn Spears in the first Labor of Jericho series, thanks to help from Sammy Guevara. Now, after the match, MJF revealed part 2, and it would be none other than Nick Gage who stared down Chris Jericho. Now, in a backstage promo later on the show, Chris Jericho revealed he was bringing back the Painmaker character to face off against Gage. Now, this is the same character he has used in New Japan Pro Wrestling, which is a more sort of violent and gritty element of Jericho, but we're talking nowhere near the violence of Nick Gage. Now, Gage, of course, is Game Changer Wrestling, GCW's world champion. In the last few months, he's really established himself. I mean, he was a cult following on social media, but really, that Dark Side of the Ring episode, I think, really opened people's eyes to him. And he's been having feuds with the likes of John Moxley and Matt Cardona in GCW. So I am fascinated by this. I know a lot of people have criticized AEW for booking him and all this kind of stuff. I think in reality, look, I think it was inevitable. I think it really was inevitable. Once Nick Gage started to get some momentum after Dark Side of the Ring, again, he always had the cult following. People knew him from GCW anyway, but certainly that Dark Side of the Ring profile piece really opened people's eyes, and I think it was inevitable. I really do. If you've got people like Moxley in AEW, who's obviously an advocate for Nick Gage, I think it's fascinating. Now, in reality, there's going to be a lot of people watching AEW next week that probably aren't totally familiar with Gage, but I think it's fascinating. I still want to see a situation where we have Moxley, Eddie Kingston, Nick Gage versus the Bucks and Omega. I think that's a six-man that has to happen at one point. I'm surprised that Gage is coming in and aligning with MJF to face off against Jericho. That seems a bit, I guess, out of character. I don't know, but it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, and I don't even know if Chris Jericho knows what he's getting himself in for next week, because as I mentioned, Nick Gage, I'm not the most familiar with his work. Certainly wasn't prior to Dark Side of the Ring, and I've seen some of the crazy stuff he's doing. I know it's a no rules match, but I don't know if we're getting fluorescent light tubes and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if we're getting that next week, considering, this is still cable television. This is still TNT. I mean, we had a Texas Deathmatch main event last night, and even that at points where you were going, especially with like the fork in the head, I was thinking, like, is TNT really going to go for this? So I don't think we're going to get an ultra-violent death match of light tubes and all that kind of stuff. But Nick Cage came out with the pizza cutter, so maybe we're going to get that. We saw that at Slammiversary on Saturday night as well with Sami Callihan and Kenny Omega. So anything's possible, but I mean, I'm fascinated. I'm absolutely fascinated to see that one next week. Now, I mentioned in the Texas Deathmatch, we have a new IWGP United States Champion because Lance Archer defeated John Moxley, surprisingly, in last night's main event of Fyter Fest. Now, the two battled in a wild Texas Deathmatch that saw Moxley get chokeslammed through tables with barbed wire boards on them. Moxley was unable to answer the referee's 10 count and then lost the championship. This is Archer's second run as IWGP United States Champion after winning it for the first time in 2019. Now, as previously reported, New Japan Pro Wrestling star Hikuleo was in the crowd last night. He was at ringside, and it was then announced that he would be facing the winner of the match in next week's AEW Dynamite Fight for the Fallen event. So Archer and Hikuleo had a face-off to close out last night's show. I don't think we can rule out a title change next week. I said before that I wouldn't be surprised if New Japan wanted to get the bout back, considering that, again, Moxley couldn't defend it for so long last year because of the pandemic. But I think it makes a lot of sense to keep it over here and over there rather than the United States, because Japan's a bit of a mess right now. It's a state of emergency just for the Olympics. So I thought the main event was thoroughly enjoyable. I think the finish was really well done, actually, because the way they booked that match, it was surprising because I think you just don't expect Moxley to probably put over Lance Archer. No disrespect to Archer, but Moxley is very protected in AEW. But the way they booked the finish is they had Karrion Kross. I can see Karrion Kross on my screen. They had John Moxley lose, but it didn't hurt him at all. It put over Lance Archer. Didn't hinder or hurt Moxley. I don't even think it counts against his win-loss record because it's a New Japan Pro Wrestling Sanctuary match. So I think it worked very well. The crowd loved it, and it was a very enjoyable main event. It was a very enjoyable show. So I enjoyed it, and I'm interested to see what happens next week. I'm interested to see what Moxley's going to do next, because I thought this was going to be his run in AEW now. His next storyline was going to be defending this United States Championship, but that's not the case now. So certainly that's very interesting too. Now, we also had Chavo Guerrero make his AEW debut last night at Fyter Fest. Now, he was announced last night as Andrade El Idolo's new executive consultant, replacing his aunt-in-law, Vicky Guerrero. Now, Guerrero said, quote, "I hear this is the place to be. When I walked backstage, I couldn't believe all the talent back there. What a great time to be a wrestling fan. With all due respect to all those men and women back there, I don't see anyone who has as much talent as this man, Andrade El Idolo, right there." Now, they were then interrupted by Pac, Pentagon Jr., Rey Fenix, Death Triangle. There was a bit of a pull-apart brawl as they closed the segment, which kind of ended a bit awkwardly. The segment essentially had Andrade trying to convince Pentagon and Rey Fenix to join him. I don't know if I'm behind splitting up Death Triangle, but I also looked at it and said you could certainly have a faction led by Andrade, which has the Lucha Brothers and Chavo Guerrero. That certainly feels like a very good fit, doesn't it? I don't know if they'll go in that direction, but I like this pairing a lot more than Andrade and Vicky Guerrero. Now, I understand they wanted to have, the Guerrero lineage involved, which is probably why they had Vicky with Andrade, but Chavo just makes way more sense. Not that he's a better promo than Vicky, it works better. I think it just works better. That pairing with Vicky and Andrade felt odd. Vicky's kind of become a comedy character, or kind of a caricature of what she was in WWE at certain points, and I just didn't think the Andrade pairing worked. Chavo Guerrero does. Chavo Guerrero works really well. It's legitimacy. You keep that lineage of the Guerrero name. If anything, it's even more legitimate in having Chavo as opposed to Vicky. I'm very happy with that. So I'm very interested to see what that is going forward. And I have a sneaky suspicion at one point we're going to see Phoenix and Pentagon turn on Pac, and we're going to have Andrade, Chavo, and the Lucha Brothers as another faction in AEW. But I think this is a very good pairing, and very interested to see how Andrade and Chavo Guerrero coexist going forward. It's been announced for Malachi Black's debut match inside of an AEW ring. Malachi Black will compete in his first match inside of an AEW ring on August 4th against Cody Rhodes. This was confirmed last night on AEW Dynamite Fyter Fest Night 2. Now, it's going to be taking place at AEW Dynamite Homecoming on Wednesday, August 4th. Now, we didn't have any appearances last night by Black or Cody Rhodes, but the match was officially announced. They weren't needed, frankly. They're definitely going with a good versus evil, light versus dark, heaven versus hell. They're definitely going with the Shawn Michaels, Undertaker WrestleMania 25 vibes. I noticed that immediately last week when they had, the whole Cody Rhodes in a white suit, Malachi Black in the all-black suit. And I know people get so angry when they're going for Undertaker, Shawn Michaels WrestleMania 25 because it's such a mythic and legendary match. People go, how dare you? Cody Rhodes versus Malachi Black isn't WrestleMania 25 HBK versus Taker. No. I'm going, no, they're going with that aesthetic. Look at the image. Look at the graphic. It's clearly heaven versus hell. Clearly. I think the irony is that Cody Rhodes has been promoted as AEW Jesus. And considering that he's booked like that anyway, I mean, gosh, how many times have we shoved in our face that Cody Rhodes is a big star by the AEW programming? He's got his own reality show. He's an executive. He's on the TBS Go Big show. He gets turned on by all of his friends because he's such a good Samaritan, blah, blah, blah. He is AEW Jesus. They're now admitting that he's AEW Jesus. I know there's some concerns that Cody Rhodes is going to win this match. I would be frankly stunned. I would be absolutely stunned if Cody Rhodes wins this match. You get the impression that AEW knows what they have with Malachi Black. And if Cody Rhodes wins that one, then, Black can recover. But it would just be bizarre booking because a loss does not hurt Cody Rhodes at all here. Whereas a loss does hurt Malachi Black. First impressions are everything, especially in your first matches. And I know people know Aleister Black from WWE, but this is different. This certainly is different. So I would be floored, absolutely floored, if AEW wanted to persist with AEW Jesus by having him go over AEW's devil in this sense in Malachi Black. I don't think they'll go in that direction. I would be, again, floored if they did, but who knows. But I don't think that's going to be the case. This got people talking after Fyter Fest last night. I didn't even know if I wanted to talk about it. But after Fyter Fest last night, AEW President Tony Khan came out. He addressed the fans at the Curtis Caldwell Center in Garland, Texas, who were great, by the way, last night. What a great atmosphere. He thanked the fans for sticking around for the taping of AEW Dark Elevation. He said, quote, "Thank you for being here. We're just getting started. I want to tell you a little about what's coming. The first match we're going to have features one of the top wrestlers in AEW. His name is Jungle Boy. We're going to have some great matches, including Pac versus Chuck Taylor as the main event of Elevation. That's a huge match." This is what got people talking, because it always does when you talk about WWE and AEW event, or vice versa. Khan then went on to reference WWE's Performance Center. He said, quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a Performance Center at AEW. This is our Performance Center. We have the best young wrestlers in the world, and this is where we showcase them." Again, I know people get so angry because they're going, "Oh, why do they need to reference?" I agree. You don't need to reference. You don't. But I also disagree with just the people getting so angry on social media. Oh, people get so upset by this. Oh, another WWE reference, and oh, If you don't care about WWE, why'd you mention them? You sign all the stars. And then the thing I would say, the criticism I would say is, Tony Khan, just don't mention it. Not because you know, it's wrong to mention it. The reason I would say don't mention it is because you stir up the crazies. You stir up the crazies on social media that are desperate for a war. We're desperate for conflict. They're desperate for AEW and WWE to hate each other and the fans to hate each other. And you can only like WWE. You can only like AEW. You can't like both. And if you go from one company to another, you're a martyr and you've sold out and you went for the money and your career's going to die. AEW in the mud, WWE in the mud, all that kind of stuff. That's the only thing I would say with Tony Khan is don't mention it. Why? Because you just stir up the crazies. And they don't need much stirring to be crazed because they already are. So that would be what I would say about that. But I don't, you know, who cares? I mean, honestly, who cares? This was brilliant. I love this. And I know, again, those people that hate AEW would really hate this. But I love this. Audibly, I laughed out loud when this happened last night, and it was the confrontation between the Icon Sting and Orange Cassidy last night at Fyter Fest. Now, both men were ringside for the Darby Allin versus Wheeler Yuta match. Now, late into the match, Sting confronted Cassidy at the bottom of the ramp, to which Cassidy responded with his signature hands in the pockets. The two then began to trade some of Cassidy's signature soft kicks before each lined up for a super kick. The Icon then hit his familiar chest beat. He beat in his chest, but so, like, lazy. It wasn't like crazy. It was like that with a slow, freshly squeezed twist. Now, the match, of course, concluded with Darby Allin getting the victory after hitting the coffin drop. It was just, I wasn't going to mention it, but as soon as I saw it last night, I went, I have to, because it was so funny. I mean, it was so funny. Again, the Sting, the orange kicks and stuff like that, I thought, oh, that's cool. That's crazy. It's wild that Sting's doing that. But once Sting started doing that, audibly, I laughed out loud because it was hilarious. Sting sold it so well. I mean, so well. And I know that, you know, Jim Cornette and those people that hate AEW will hate this because it's Sting, a legend and icon, and he's doing stuff with pockets, Orange Cassidy. But the crowd was going crazy. I mean, crazy. And the viewers at home were audibly laughing out loud as well. So, I mean, how can you argue with that? How can you argue with that? I thought it was just, I mean, really was absolutely tremendous. Finally, we have some things announced for Fight for the Fallen next week because it continues. All of this AEW craziness continues next week. So we have some matches confirmed for Fight for the Fallen. Of course, it's the 10-man elimination tag team match, The Elite versus Hangman Page and Dark Order. The winners, obviously, if Page and his team win, they will receive future title shots. Of course, if they lose, they won't receive title shots ever. Of course, you've got Jericho versus Nick Gage in a no-rules match. It's also been confirmed that Tony Khan is set to make a major new live event announcement. As to what that announcement is, I don't know. How can you make even more announcements? It's just crazy what's going on in AEW right now. But of course, as always, guys, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these AEW news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about AEW, WWE, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Got the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right-hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.